The topic of medieval fantasy has always intrigued me. Imagine living in a world without any modern technology, where the limits of science and common sense don't exist, and the only worries you have are the ones right in front of you. This feeling of isolation and nihilism is what I wanted to capture in my indie game, a stereotypical fantasy RPG where the main premise is to slay the dragon and save your kingdom. Making this game presented a lot of challenges, but also taught me much about world building and game development as a whole. This is how I made Dragon Zero. Dragon Zero would be made to be played on the Game Boy, a 20-plus-year-old game console with severe technological limitations. I did this because I wanted to make the game feel nostalgic as well as physically old. Since I wanted to build a world in a sort of simpler time, it made sense to literally place the game back in time, to an era before things like social media and modern-day societal stresses even existed. The idea of the game is simple. Beat all the levels, defeat the dragon, and save your kingdom, a very archetypal idea for a fantasy premise. The game features bosses such as Chimera, Ogres, and Golems, which are all common characters found in medieval fantasy stories. While the game seems manageable, the scope is large. There are 8 biomes that you explore, similar to worlds in games like Super Mario Bros. Each of these worlds have anywhere between 8 and 20 levels within them, each 2 screens long. Because of this, I ended up having to design hundreds of unique levels as well as several more meticulous scenes needed for other gameplay elements. Additionally, the Game Boy has harsh limitations on the amount of data you can store in a single cartridge. If I wanted this game to be possible, I had to be careful with my design and planning.
They said it wasn't humanly possible. All the power and excitement of Nintendo right in the palm of your hand. Introducing Game Boy. It's portable, it's in stereo, and its games are interchangeable. Game Boy comes complete with batteries and the outrageous new game Tetris. And for head-to-head competition, use Video Link and blow your opponent away. Game Boy, only from Nintendo. Now you're playing with power, portable power.
Because of the chosen time period, I drew inspiration from games like Final Fantasy and Zelda 2, 2 games that I believe accurately capture the intended setting of a medieval fantasy world. These games both originate from the NES, a home game console released in 1985. Zelda 2 is a mix of top-down gameplay for traversing the game world, as well as a fast-paced side-scroller for its main gameplay feature. Final Fantasy, on the other hand, is more turn-based RPG focused, so I mainly drew from its world building and map design. Games in the 80s tended to be less straightforward. That is, they usually give the player significantly less information about mechanics and controls compared to games in modern day. This is because, unlike today, the manuals of retro games played a big part in giving context to the player. If you didn't read the manual, you were forced to go in blind. While this may seem like a flaw, I saw this as a vital aspect of capturing the retro game vibe. In Dragon Zero, information about the lore and premise can be found in pubs and villages. However, these pubs aren't mandatory or even very obvious when progressing through the game, so it's up to the curiosity of the player if they want to fully understand the game's extra details and context. Either way, however, the path to follow is clear. Beat all the levels and follow the trail in front of you to progress. This way, no matter what kind of player you are, you always know what to do next. I aimed for Dragon Zero to give a lot of freedom to the player in terms of its gameplay. While the game is very clear in telling you what to do in terms of level progression, there are little guidelines in the combat and player exploration. For example, Dragon Zero's boss fights. The common structure of a good boss fight is simple. The boss's logic is made up of several phases or attacks. Look at this example from New Super Mario Bros. Wii. In this boss fight, Lemmy has 2 main phases that he iterates through. His first is this ball attack, where he shoots a ball at Mario from his wand. Lemmy then moves into his second phase, where he charges at Mario head-on across the screen. These 2 phases alternate throughout the entire fight, with the exception of his shell attack, where Lemmy becomes invulnerable for a bit and spins around in his shell. This is a kind of in-between attack phase that is only activated after Lemmy takes damage. This phase buffers out the repetitiveness of the boss fight, as well as ensuring that Mario doesn't beat the boss too fast by hitting Lemmy 3 times instantly. While the structure obviously isn't utilized in every single boss fight to ever exist, you can usually spot the structure in one form or another in most games, and it's pretty apparent in Dragon Zero. Take this Fire Spirit mini-boss for example. It has 3 main attacks. The first is his purple magic attack, where the fire spirit moves to the center of the screen and launches a slow tracking projectile. Its second phase is a kind of in-between phase, where the spirit rapidly zips across the screen at random directions. Finally, its fireball attack, moving to the left of the screen to shoot fireballs. The fire spirit has no invulnerable phase like Lemmy's shell attack. Instead, after taking damage, it repeats its magic attack. Also unlike Lemmy, the fire spirit's attacks happen at random. What makes Lemmy seemingly easy to beat is his repetitiveness. He iterates through his two phases back to back until he takes damage. Randomized attacks make the fire spirit less predictable and keeps the player on their toes. The absence of an invulnerable state also means that the fire spirit is always able to receive damage. Players can't rely on obvious openings to attack, instead they must rely on instinct and evasion to make their own openings. While this does technically mean that it's possible for the fire spirit to kill you very quickly, the speed and aggression of the spirit's attacks kind of even out the playing field, as it can kill you just as fast. The fast-paced combat I wanted for the game would also present another challenge. The Game Boy Color is a very technologically limited console with just 32 kilobytes of internal work RAM, which basically manages all the game's processes. For reference, a PlayStation 5 has a total capacity of 16 gigabytes of RAM, and 1 gigabyte is a whopping 1 million kilobytes worth, meaning that the modern-day PlayStation 5 has about 500,000 times as much RAM as a Game Boy Color. It's pretty obvious now why basic pixel art and rudimentary game logic is required when making Game Boy games. It's because of this that the scope of Dragon Zero was such a challenge. If I wanted the game to be as large as I hoped, I would need to be cautious with my design. An example of this is the player's health system. The player has 5 hearts that represent the HP. Originally, I designed this GUI as 5 separate sprites locked in the corner of the screen. Each heart was assigned a number value representing its respective HP amount. Then, each sprite would check if the player's health dropped below its respective number value, and change its appearance accordingly. If this were running on any other engine, it would likely cause no issue. However, the structure for this system turned out to be extremely inefficient, especially for Game Boy standards. Having each sprite individually run its own process meant that there would be 5 processes all trying to run at once every single frame. On top of that, managing player collisions, controls, and enemy behavior also takes up more processes to be called every single frame. Having this many processes each trying to run all at once several times a second caused extreme lag. I fixed the issue by combining the 5 hearts into one singular sprite. By storing the large sprite as a 4-direction sprite in GB Studio, I was able to store each state of the hearts as directions normally used for top-down RPG player characters. I would then be able to check the player's health each frame using one singular process rather than 5, and manipulate the direction of the heart sprite to match the visuals. While nothing on the front end seems to change between before and after, the benefits of optimizing the structure are made clear in comparison. Towards the end of the main development phase, even more problems emerged in the game due to lack of optimization. This is a kernel panic screen, which is basically the screen that shows when the emulator crashes due to being overwhelmed. The screen nearly ended all of my progress, as after building so many levels and sprites, the game just stopped working and it seemed like it would be impossible to complete the project. However, after researching the issue, I realized that the crash was likely a result of overloaded variables. In programming, variables are changeable values stored in the system's memory, usually for future reference. Commonly, variables have different data types that are used for different purposes. For instance, integers, strings, and booleans are all different data types stored as variables. In Dragon Zero, I use variables to track values needed for gameplay. Examples include the player's health, level status, and position. The Game Boy allows for a maximum amount of 768 variables, simply the limit capacity of the hardware, which is why this message was so horrifying to see upon building the ROM. The warning message informs me that I have 1,802 variables, well over 1,000 variables past the limit. Why development and testing have gone smoothly until this moment without crashes, I have no idea. But this just goes to show how important optimizing the structure of your code and design is, as well as how much I still have to learn about being smart with my development. I didn't initially realize this issue mainly due to an ignorance of my local variables. There are 2 main types of variables in game development, public and private. Private variables basically belong to a given object. This means that they can only be accessed and queried from the parent object itself. On the other hand, public variables essentially belong to the system as a whole, being accessible from anywhere, from any object. In GB Studio, instead of private and public, these terms are renamed to local and global. Examples of this include the enemy's health in-game. Since the enemy object is really the only one who needs to access its health variable, it can be local. However, values such as the player's health must be accessible from anywhere, as it can be referenced and changed from the inventory, in levels, and by other objects and more. This means that the global variable is the most reasonable choice for the player's health. In Dragon Zero, each enemy is its own unique object, meaning that every time a new enemy pops up on screen, it initiates a new set of local variables for it to reference. This is extremely inefficient. If an enemy is killed on a level is completed, there is no longer a need for the system to remember the values of the fallen enemies, meaning that the system is currently using excessive amounts of space in its memory that serve no purpose. To fix this, I had to migrate my project to a newer version of GB Studio. This was a bit risky, as oftentimes migrating projects could cause new bugs to appear, nothing a trusty backup file couldn't solve, however. The reason I updated the project was because of GB Studio 4.1's prefab capabilities. Prefabs are essentially template objects that can be referenced and copied throughout the game engine. This allowed for greater control over my NPCs and enemies, as I would be able to alter all individual values at once since they reference the same prefab. Prefabs also aid in memory usage, as all copies of a template would reference the same code rather than each having duplicates of their own. I next changed the structure of storing the enemy data. Currently, I have each enemy creating their own variables for them to use, causing a lot of dead space in the system's memory. The solution to this was to use a set of global variables rather than local ones. These global variables represented health values for each individual enemy that would be reused and reset every level. That way, the variable used for a bandit's health in level 1-1 could be recycled for a goblin's health in level 8-2. This cut what was likely hundreds of excessive variables down to 6, making the game playable once again. Eventually, the player will confront the game's final boss, the creature that has been alluded to all game but never seen, the looming cause of the kingdom's dilemmas, the dragon. While the art for the boss fight has not yet been completed, the dragon's boss fight is intended to be longer and extremely difficult. This fight has to be the peak of the player's journey, as throughout the game the dragon has constantly been alluded to by the narrative, creating an image of the dragon only within the player's mind up until the final fight occurs. Dragons have been commonly represented as this kind of mythical and transcendent creature across cultures. In fiction, dragons are often used to symbolize an overwhelming conflict or hurdle to be conquered. It's this aspect of intimidation and finality that I want to convey in the final battle. By conquering the final stage, the player would have achieved everything they worked so hard for, journeying across an entire continent and defeating hundreds of levels of enemies. The difficulty is rough, but it makes the accomplishment of success all the better. To defeat a dragon would not simply be to defeat a physical creature, but to also overcome an internal hurdle, the dragon within yourself. Dragon Zero was one of the first larger scale projects that I took on, starting even before Archaea. The game is still in progress, but I plan to put together a demo soon if it gets any attention. Working on this project has taught me a lot about the game design process and world building. It's through Dragon Zero that I've been able to explore this theme of medieval fantasy represented on the platform of retro games, and understand why this kind of setting appeals to me so much. So now you know how Dragon Zero has been made so far and some of the tricks that went into it. Be sure to like and subscribe, and thank you for watching.